Good afternoon. This is Nooga Radio, and I'm joined today by Clay Whitaker. I'm Russell Stroud. We're talking about law. We're talking about legalities. We're talking about things that affect you directly, because law is not just a nebulous thing out there that's sort of mysterious and in a faraway land. It's something that actually does affect us, and I'll admit I'm a little bit ill-educated on the subject. So that's why we have here Clay Whitaker. Clay, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Russell. Good to be here today.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and to you too. You know, law, and I sort of want to jump into this with one question that's been sort of in the back of my mind the whole time we've been thinking about having a law show here. At what point do I actually need an attorney?
Well, it depends on the set of circumstances, but if it's an issue that's related to criminal law, I think you need to have an attorney at the first available opportunity when you realize there's a problem. And most of the time, people get involved with criminal cases, which is one of my specialties, is that they tend to ignore the necessity of the attorney until it's too late. Well, the primary way that people get in trouble after they've committed an offense or caused problems that might lead to their arrest, folks start talking. And as soon as you start talking, you usually convict yourself. That's one of the reasons we have a Constitution. It's always a good reminder to remember that the Constitution doesn't require you to talk, and that people that do usually convict themselves. So in that sense, always contact the attorney at the first blush of any contact with law enforcement. And the second thing, if you're involved in a civil case, you should plan in advance. I don't usually advise people to plan in advance to commit a crime, but if you're going to be involved in civil cases, you need to make sure that you understand the law before you get involved in things that might either increase the cost of litigation or legal expenses that occur down the road. We usually find that rather than preparing in advance, people usually get themselves in trouble and then come to the attorney to undo the problems that they've created. And that's more expensive. And it certainly doesn't leave the options open that you may have had at the beginning prior to getting involved in the circumstances that would require legal counsel.
Right, and you have to remember, too, that whenever you get in a legal situation and the police are sitting there listening to you, they're probably writing down everything you say.
Well, at this day and age, they not only write it down, but you're videotaped, you're audio taped. And, that's one of the problems that I always have with clients. I do a lot of representation that results in criminal litigation, that is litigation where we're defending someone who's been indicted on an offense. One of the many problems that we always face is that when people are incarcerated in jail, the first thing they start to do is to make phone calls because they're by themselves alone in the jail or with their friends in jail, and they call their relatives and they discuss things. And that always is good fodder for prosecutors to have information that leads to prosecution and to conviction. So when you're in jail, or whether you're in the back of a police car or whether you're standing next to a police officer, you need to keep your mouth shut.
Sure. So discussions about the weather may be permitted, but nothing beyond that.
I wouldn't even say that. Even seemingly innocuous and innocent conversations can be used if taken out of context. Many times it's difficult for the lawyer to control the way that things appear when they're said in a particular context and then introduced into evidence later on. So if you say it, it might be used against you. That's the reason the Constitution says you don't have to talk. And my advice is you shouldn't.
Right. That's why the Fifth Amendment happens to be there. Isn't it a great thing?
That's true. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is I don't say I watch a lot of TV, but I've watched TV once or twice in my time. And one thing that always pops up in these, reality crime shows, they'll show footage from inside an interrogation room. Right. And you'll have the two policemen who are grilling this guy, the two detectives, and he sits there and they say the interview lasts for 6 hours. I'm thinking 6 hours. And then at the very end of it, the guy says, you know what? I want a lawyer. Now, hold on a second, man. Like, maybe you should have said that first thing, right?
Well, that's usually good advice. So don't wait there the whole time. Ask for your lawyer frequently. Ask for it early and often, as many people like to say. One of the recent constitutional rulings made by the Supreme Court has indicated that police officers don't have to take your first answer as the one that is the answer for always. They can, when you ask for an attorney, if you ask for one early in the day, they can come back later and try to question you again, and you have to continually assert your Fifth Amendment rights. That means you understand your Fifth Amendment rights and that you're prepared to use them. So like you say, don't sit there for 6 hours. assert your Fifth Amendment right, that you want counsel, then you're not going to speak, and continue to do that. That's my advice.
So you're not doing anything wrong when you're invoking your Fifth Amendment rights. That's not the wrongdoing.
No, I think that, really Americans, a lot of them at least, are really exhibitionists at heart. And what I mean by that is that when given the opportunity to say, would you like to search my vehicle? Or if the officer asks you questions about certain things, you have no problem discussing all of your details of your life and all the things that may incriminate you and giving permission to search. My advice is, don't talk. You don't have to. Police officers, in most circumstances, can be considered at least friendly. But in the circumstances where you may be potentially the victim, where you may be potentially the focus of a criminal investigation, they're not your friends, and you don't need to speak with them.
And I think there is sort of a pervasive mentality among Americans, speaking as American, I can say that we have a sort of a combative attitude sometimes where we really want to get into an argument, even when one really isn't necessary. So you may say, yeah, you can search my car. What are you going to do about it? You find something in there, big deal, and you want to get into an argument about it. And arguing with police is probably not the best course of action at any point in time, right?
Well, that's true. And the other thing is, it's always the old statement, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why would you not want to allow the search? Well, I mean, I, as an American also, I don't necessarily have anything to hide, but I don't have to show everybody everything I have. And just the same way as I mentioned before, the word exhibitionist comes to mind. If someone says, hey, I'd like to see what you look like without your clothes on, you don't have anything to hide, do you? Well, I'm not going to take my clothes off just because they've asked me to do so, and neither should you allow a search of your vehicle or your home or any other place just because a police officer has asked for that.
And how do we get to this point where it seems like, and maybe it's just pervasion in media where we hear about things more, but how do we get to the point where it seems like every single story about someone who's been arrested, you look at the news story, and if you have a certain amount of legal minding, you can see, wait a minute, their rights were violated here, here, and here. How do we get to that point where it seems like rights are being violated by the state almost every second?
Well, it's a big country. There's lots of police officers doing their job, trying to interdict crime. And one of the things police officers do is that they do their best to try to, as they say, get the bad guy. And that's resulted in a number of things. One of the things that constantly that I find in my practice is that the zeal that police officers have and that prosecutors have corresponds directly with the kind of legislation that we have. And there are unintended consequences for those sorts of things. I mean by that officers, although they're trained in the Constitution and know the Constitution to a limited degree, many of them are very, very astute, and I'm not going to qualify what they know or don't know. That's not the point. The point is that if an officer can see the opportunity to get a conviction in a set of circumstances, many times they will look at the ends justifying the means as a way to get that conviction. Now, it's our job as attorneys to stop that when it occurs. So there are some checks and balances. However, we can't control the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has done a great job on its own to, what I would say, favor big business, favor law enforcement, which is big business, and to ignore the individual, ignore our Constitution. It's been a big swing in the last 100 years to basically destroy the fabric of the Constitution and those very parts of it that deal directly with the criminal prosecution side of things.
Now, you seem like someone who knows quite a bit about the Constitution, so I'll ask you a question to clarify something for the listener. What does the Supreme Court do at a constitutional level? What is its authorization?
Well, if you look at the Constitution, it really doesn't give the Supreme Court the right to pass judgment on legislation and or to interpret the issues that may result in that particular piece of legislation or law. But the Constitution was originally designed, or it is a reflection of our recognition of inherent rights. So we have rights that are inherent. We have the right to worship, the right to freely speak, which is constantly under attack in this country. We have the right to have privacy. So the search and seizure portion of the Constitution in the Fourth Amendment really reflects the sort of doctrine that every American and our English heritage reflects. that a man is secure in his castle, his home being his castle. So the requirement for warrants is reflected in the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the right to counsel, the right to be to not have to prosecute yourself essentially by making statements, which we just got through talking about, which lead to your own conviction, and the right to a trial by jury and the right to indictment, and those things that are present in the Constitution. Supreme Court does have the authority to pass judgment on particular instances related to the conviction of someone, which is whether or not that conviction was constitutional. The problem herein has been what I certainly consider to be that legislation's been enacted under the Commerce Clause, and there's a long history that we could talk about with that essentially has resulted in unintended consequences. The sort of war on drugs, lots of unintended consequences that have damaged the Constitution. Primarily, the Fourth Amendment is almost meaningless now. It certainly does have some a little life left in it, but the Supreme Court continues to act in ways that are against the Constitution and our rights that are reflected in the Fourth Amendment. There's been a lot of constitutional activity recently in regards to the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment. So those things are still active, and we still have some protections, but just not as much as I think the direct, clear reading of the Constitution reflects.
It's sort of a domino effect where you have one decision that's made here, and then a few years down the line, another one, and another one, and another one, and you get to the point where some of the clauses and some of the amendments just don't really mean much of anything.
Well, that's true. And then the other part of it is that the interaction between our legislature and the Congress and the Constitution and the Supreme Court and the way it's applied locally, certainly within our local federal district court, the state courts, and within the Sixth Circuit, how those things play out really reflects in what we talked about before, sort of the drift away from the protection of the individual and the protection of big business and big government. And so those things work against us, and they work against the Constitution. And I think, people don't really realize the connection between progressivism and the Constitution, and the idea that progressive government basically is that we don't need a Constitution, and progressivism has gone out of its way. And that is basically, if you were to look at either party, so the Democrats primarily and the Republicans as well, both believe in big government. And for the big government to exist, it has to ignore the dictates of the Constitution, the obvious one being the 10th Amendment. Those enumerated powers, and our government is a government of enumerated powers, been consistently ignored. And I mentioned earlier that the clear place that you can see that is in the application of the Commerce Clause and the interstate commerce claimed right, at least to regulate interstate commerce, and to, for instance, where that really impacts on us might be in the war on drugs and on the particular legislation that might impact upon the type of drugs that you're allowed to take or use, those things that you're not allowed to use, who is authorized to use them, and the punishments for illegal possession of those drugs.
You bring up the war on drugs, and that's kind of interesting because I've been a big proponent of ending that, not because I'm a drug user myself, because I'm not. I just think people should be able to make their own decisions for their own, for themselves. But what about the war on drugs? Where does the government get the power to say you can use, say, prescription drugs with doctor allowance, but marijuana, as an example, completely out of the question?
Well, there's a long history of prohibition, and basically prohibition is the claimed authority of the government to regulate certain products. It goes back, I think, the original sort of genesis for legislation related to drugs and the use of drugs and alcohol can certainly be traced back to Prohibition era, but also if you go back to the patent drugs. So patent drugs, there was a problem, and the consistency of those drugs, the kinds of drugs, people were injured, so the government began regulating them. And I certainly believe that there's position for that, but when you get involved with, for instance, we mentioned the war on drugs, there are unintended consequences. I'll give you an example. If you go back and look at the case involving Len Bias, many listeners will remember Len Bias as a very proficient basketball player from the University of Maryland. In the mid-'80s, he died as a result of a drug overdose, the use of crack cocaine. And that cocaine was sort of, his death at least, was the genesis of the latest overhauling of our drug laws, and then the the series of things that happened in the drug laws, and I can go into that a little bit for you if you'd like. But the effect that happened as a result of Len Bias' death was the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1986, and it's continued amendment in 1988, and it's been amended several times since then. But that resulted in having mandatory drug crimes that had penalties, mandatory sentences, very lengthy and stiff sentences, sentences that resulted in life imprisonment, also sentences that result in when someone has passed, like they did with Len Bias, that those particular sentences carry mandatory sentences that are very lengthy. And so it's important for us to discuss the way that those things came about, and then exactly what the unintended consequences of those things were. And that seems like overcrowding in jails, continued erosion of our constitutional rights by law enforcement on the war on drugs, which really is a war on individuals, a war on persons, and not a war on drug suppliers. If you'll recall the history, we certainly can go into the history of how the cocaine started this basic problem that Congress believed was worthy of the nomination war on drugs.
Wow. So you talk about the Omnibus Crime Bill. That's something you brought up a little bit earlier before we got on the air. Omni means everything, right? So omnibus, break down that word for me. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's an overall crime bill. So basically the crime bill, the laws that had been in place up until that point were directed at certain offenses, and they didn't have mandatory drug sentences. They were they certainly wouldn't be recognizable to persons that practice law now in terms of the severity of the sentences and the ease of conviction. And one of the things we always face as defense attorneys is the ease of conviction, particularly with conspiracy laws. Conspiracy laws were designed back in the Prohibition era to directly try to interdict the activities of crime families or crime organizations. And so basically back in those days, if you remember the stories of Elliot Ness and the FBI and the way that that crime was interdicted back in those days, well, that's been continued, and it still is today. The law that was been in place basically allowing for anyone to join a conspiracy by criminal agreement. So the criminal agreement is the very nature of a conspiracy, and the criminal conspiracy always has an object. In this case, most of the time we deal with the object being the distribution, manufacture, and possession of a controlled substance.
Well, when you talk about prohibition, that sort of sparks something in my mind, because my family is from Louisiana, way back in the old days during Prohibition, and they were moonshiners back in the day, and they were moonshiners before it was illegal too. It's just something that they always did, and the still for them was their way of life. And now suddenly these people in Washington have said that it's illegal. That kind of destroys your main source of income, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, and really, like I said before, prohibition, and in this particular instance, the war on drugs is a war on drug users. And if you wanted to expand that to the war on the low-level drug supplier, what it was originally intended to be was a war on the big drug dealer, the very wealthy, very powerful drug dealer. And that's originally what the intent of Congress. I just got through listening to the legislative history in regards to it. And it's unique in our legislative history is that Congress actually enacted the Omnibus Crime Bill without any discussion in committee. It was bipartisan, which you don't find very much these days. It was very, very much stimulated by the death of Len Bias. If those in that age bracket recall back in the 80s, that it was one of those things that when Len Bias died from his drug overdose, it dominated the airwaves. Back then, we only had a very few number of channels, not like we do today. So it really did dominate the political discussion in the nation. And resultingly, the bill was passed in about a month and a half, 2 months. As I said, it was bipartisan. It changed everything in regards to being able to fight drugs. And one of the things that happened is that those folks who were involved in, it's a sort of, we were talking about unintended consequences, the folks that were involved in drug dealing, it changed because of some of the other things that had occurred before, if you'll recall, Iran-Contra and our involvement of our own government in the procurement and the use of weapons paid for by the use of or the dealing in illegal drugs, namely cocaine. That sort of series of events that occurred back in the 80s also resulted in in this epidemic, the epicenter of the crack cocaine use occurred somewhere around San Francisco, Oakland, California. It spread from those using street gangs down into Southern California and then nationwide. Len Bias, also, he was from Maryland and from the Washington, D.C. area. Basically, the circumstances that occurred to him was two of his teammates on the basketball team, Mr. Long and Mr. Gregg, both of them had supplied or were involved in the supply of crack cocaine to him. If you'll recall, before this sort of events that had occurred with the spread of crack cocaine back in the 80s, freebasing was the method and the sort of style, the use of cocaine. And cocaine was a rich person's drug. Back in the 70s, cocaine was associated with the disco lifestyle. It was associated with wealthy people. Certainly all of the major metropolitan areas had cocaine use, but it wasn't in crack form. That didn't occur until these events I discussed back in the 80s with the spread of crack cocaine, the use of street drugs, and an involvement of our own intelligence agencies in the use. I think there's a number of people who sort of, if you believe those sorts of things, have spread that information around. I think it is documented to some degree. Consequently, we had the death of Len Bias as a result of the use of crack cocaine, and the omnibus crime bill was passed. What has happened since then is that law enforcement has used that omnibus crime bill to incarcerate people for very long sentences, mandatory jail sentences of 10 years for repeated offenses, 20 years or up to life. We've had a lot of Chattanoogans that have been incarcerated that are certainly in that category. Some of them would be considered major drug dealers, some of them not so. But multiple offenses can lead to large sentences. Consequently, if you're put in jail for those kinds of things, it's directly related back to what I would consider to be an unintended consequence of the crime bill of 1986.
Now, Clay, you seem like someone who I would want defending me because you seem very knowledgeable about, well, everything regarding law, especially criminal law. How can I get in contact with you? How can my listener contact you to be defended?
Well, I'm practicing law down at McCoon, Williams, and Ashley. I'm of counsel down there. I'm a nationally certified trial specialist with the National Board of Trial Advocacy as a criminal trial specialist. And I've been practicing law since 1988. I'm licensed in Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. Wow. Handle cases in state and federal court. My primary practice right now, at least, have a lot of cases in federal court. I've been doing that as been on the criminal justice panel here and in the Northern District of Georgia since the late 1990s.
Wow. So that you've been at it for quite a while.
Been at it a while.
So it's is it something you've always wanted to do, or did you just get sort of bumped into it? Or?
Yeah, I've always been interested in it, and it's one of those things that certain things in the practice of law draw your attention. It's something that I've always been interested in and have enjoyed, and I've enjoyed representing individuals. And it's easy to for people to forget. And certainly there's a great sentiment in our populace that says, hey, we need law and order. While I don't disagree that we do need law and order, one of the unintended consequences of being too zealous with law and order is that you destroy your own relationship with your neighbors by destroying the Constitution and by allowing law enforcement to be too zealous. It's important always to sort of rein that in.
Okay, well, thank you. And we'll talk more about this in just a few seconds right here on Nooga Radio. We're talking with Clay Whitaker.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240. McCoon, Williams, and Ashley PLLC offers a full array of legal services to meet the needs of businesses and individuals. Our attorneys represent diverse backgrounds, interests, and legal emphasis, but we share one common goal: providing the highest quality legal services to our clients through the combination of our talents, experience, and expertise. In each case, we strive to tailor those services to meet each client's specific circumstances. Business law, business organization, civil litigation, commercial litigation, conservatorship and guardian law, bankruptcy law, just to name a few. With over 188 years of combined experience, McCoon, Williams, Ashley PLLC is here to help you and your business succeed. MWALawFirm.com. That's MWALawFirm.com. Call 423-756-6400. That's 423-756-6400.
Is your career careening, maybe sagging, wheezing? Let me suggest a job with huge income potential. Dealing with people. Call Steve or Jada for a confidential interview. 855-8484. 855-8484. Maybe the most important call you make all year.
Are you shovel ready to build a house, but you're not a builder? Are you shovel ready? Michael's Homes is ready to bulldoze its way to a solution for you. You have ideas on what you want in a house, but you're looking for someone to bring your ideas into a plan and turn your plan into a house. Michael's Homes, custom builder. Michael's Homes has lots available at a new subdivision, River Bay Estates, that's Harrison. Maybe River Watch in Saudi Daisy. Choices galore, lots, houses, beautiful homes all over Chattanooga. The Canyons, Hickson, Crystal Brook, Appleton. Drive in, take a look, consult with us. We build on your lot or ours. Homes-Chattanooga.com.
Call 423-413-9929. There's a reason why Alliance Physical Therapy is a choice of professionals and those who care about first-class, top-notch service and treatment. Because at Alliance Physical Therapy of Chattanooga, we don't just treat the symptoms in your body. Whether you're suffering from stiffness, muscle spasms, back pain, chronic headaches every day, stress of life demanding more and more of you, Alliance Physical Therapy takes a holistic approach to healing, mind, body, and soul. Alliance Physical Therapy with a location near you and 9 others in the Chattanooga area. If you don't have a doctor or if your physician's plan for chronic pain is not working, Alliance Physical Therapy will help. Visit Alliance Physical Therapy on the web at nopainpt.com. That's nopainpt.com. Alliance Physical Therapy.
How about we change that to Built in the USA? For over 21 years, Affordable Computers has been building computers right here in the good old USA, in Chattanooga, using the highest quality parts and components in every new computer they build. Tell us the exact system you need, we'll build it to your specifications. Or you can choose from a wide selection of our PCs and laptops, starting at under $200. All Affordable Computers are upgradable, guaranteed. Affordable Computers services their computers in store, typically within 1 to 3 days. And when you call, they answer the phone. You get support within minutes that you can understand. Affordable Computers of Chattanooga. And service and support extends for the life of the computer, not just for the warranty of the PC. So there's no reason to shop anywhere else. Call Affordable Computers now on Highway 58 Chattanooga, 423-499-1975. That's 423-499-1975.
Or visit our Fort O store, 706-858-5888.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
AM 1240 Nooga Radio News, Russell Stroud reporting. New early voting sites. That was the item on the agenda for the City Council last night. City Councilman Chris Anderson releasing a proposal which would add 6 new early voting stations in the Chattanooga area. That number now been reduced down to 2, which is a feasible plan. Each new additional location will cost the city $15,000, something which the city budget, they say, can't handle. Early voting starts in February. Word coming in from the TFP that the Chattanooga Metropolitan Airport officials have approved a no-bid contract. This is for a new parking arrangement with the Chattanooga Metropolitan Airport and Republic Parking. So Republic, a local company, will continue to serve parking needs for the Chattanooga Metropolitan Airport. And the second annual Feed the Community event has been dedicated to the memory of the victims of the Woodmore bus crash, which occurred last month. The organizer of the event is the uncle of a child who was the victim of that bus crash. The purpose of the event is to hand out meals to those in need and to bring unity to the community.
Expect some sunshine and nicer weather out there through your afternoon. Slowly warming up, highs 55 to 57 tonight. A few clouds overnight, lows into the upper 30s to near 40. For Thursday and Friday, some sunshine. Still looking pretty good through Friday, highs lower to middle 50s. Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks. Christmas is better when you wrap it in red. Stop by your local Ace for gifts from brands like Weber, Craftsman, DeWalt, Traeger, Eno, and more. Only at Ace, the helpful place. And I'm Swargene 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Orr.
On AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Here's what advertisers are saying about AM 1240. HotNewsTalkRadio.com.
Radio station, they really care. They're always calling me probably once a week, checking on me, seeing how things going, see if they want to change any of the ads or do anything different, seeing what my needs are. I've gotten business off the ads that you do for me, and seems to be working well at this point.
Prices were very fair. Areas in this town that we aren't able to get other ways, your radio station is able to help us out, and I really appreciate that.
We've been very pleased with the services we've got. It seems like everybody over there cares about what they're going to do, how it's going to work for us on this end. And we've been very impressed with the creativity of the ads that we've heard. And they always seem to be right on point, even without us having to come up with what's going to be said.
I've been doing business with News Talk Radio for quite some time. It's the best place and the best value you can get for your advertisement. The commercials are great. They're very professional. I was actually blown away.
The commercial that they put together was awesome. It was way far above all the other radio stations we've dealt with. The best we've had yet, guarantee you, by far.
AM 1240 HotNewsTalkRadio.com gets results. Let us get results for your business. For no obligation free consultation, call General Sales Manager Steve Johnson. Call 423-240-5459. That's 240-5459. Or you can always email Steve at nougaradiosteve@gmail.com. That's nougaradiosteve@gmail.com. AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We get results.
This is Nooga Radio. We're talking with Clay Whitaker. I'm Russell Stroud, and we're here talking about law. We're also getting sort of into social sciences and just the community at large, because it's an important thing, and they do play together. Law permeates everything, even your life. Even if you've never been arrested, you've never even gotten a speeding ticket. Law affects you because we live in a society, supposedly, of law and order. Although we don't often see the evidence of that these days, we do still live in a supposed society of law and order. And this is going to be an odd intro. I'm a fan of video games, and I'm a fan of Grand Theft Auto, which is why I know immediately what you're talking about when you talk about Mothers Against Drunk Driving, because they campaigned against the video game Grand Theft Auto 4 because you can virtually drink and drive in that game. So I'm all familiar with their overzealousness. Now, what's your insight on MAD?
Well, I mean, Russell, certainly we can't have drunk driving.
Sure.
So we know that what Mothers Against Drunk Driving were trying to do is an important social ill. So you have to have legislation that's appropriate and that addresses mothers' concerns in regards to people getting injured as a result of consuming alcohol or other intoxicants and driving on the road. However, the legislation primarily, if you looked at the DUI statutes, we had DUI statutes before the current legislation that was sponsored by Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and all the states in our area, basically nationwide, had drunk driving statutes. Two things that happened as a result of that. We were talking about unintended consequences. So one of the things that Mothers Against Drunk Driving wanted were mandatory jail sentences. All right. And then they wanted to have a recidivist statute, which is recidivism statutes, basically enhanced punishment for multiple offenses. And so basically when you had all of this politicization, I can just call it the publicity for drinking and driving became very loud. The noise, the voice that was associated with Mothers Against Drunk Driving became very loud, and the legislatures in our area and nationwide heard them. And it was a good message. You can't say that it wasn't. However, when legislatures hear those kinds of messages and see the opportunity to seize upon an issue and politicize it, they do. The result is that you have consequences that you didn't intend. What are the consequences against in these sets of circumstances? Well, you have mandatory jail sentences. What happens when someone has a mandatory jail sentence and you deprive the judge of the opportunity to evaluate the nature of the offense, the nature and circumstances of the offender, the intent of the legislature in whatever punishment might be available, and a range of punishments that might be available? When you deprive the judge of those opportunities, you prevent him from being able to address specific circumstances that are in the case before him or her, as the judge might be. And for instance, people lose their jobs. You have a father who was out drinking and driving, maybe innocently, maybe it was they stopped after work, they had a beer with the family, he was intoxicated and he drove, he didn't realize it, he gets put in jail, as a mandatory jail sentence. He loses his license for a year. That family loses a source of income because he couldn't drive any longer, or he couldn't be insured any longer, or they couldn't afford it. They lose their home. They lose the place where they were living. They don't have the same sort of opportunities economically that they may have had. That's an unintended consequence because it was a politicized piece of legislation. What should happen, what I believe should happen, is you still should have a punishment for drinking and driving. However, you ought to let the judge have the opportunity to avoid mandatory sentencing and to address the specific nature and circumstances of the offender and the crime.
I want to hold you up there because we got a caller.
Sure.
And this is going to be fun. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Yeah, I have a question about insurance companies to insurance companies.
Sure.
Can your guest hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's the question?
Well, some years ago, my wife, who's now my ex-wife, got her car demolished. The woman was doing about 70. It was some older woman, lost control of the car and demolished her car, totaled it from the front seat to the back. And she got very little compensation. It was the same insurance company was insuring both vehicles, and I thought she got ripped off. I mean, she should have gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars based on the fact that she can't golf any longer, so on and so forth. Had a lot of injuries, but came out with hardly anything. So how does one know, especially if it's the same insurance company you get involved in a car accident with, that you're not getting ripped off? How do you know your attorney's doing the right job for you? Because I went in and he said, you can take the case. I said, I'll do a better job than you're doing because you're doing nothing. I think she settled for $12,000 and her car was totally demolished. She should have gotten several hundred thousand. And he did absolutely nothing for her. But how do you know when, you're just not being represented right? And what's the deal with if you're in an accident with the same insurer that insures you?
Okay, well, let me comment on it. So first, insurance is a contract. Contracts are entered into but between two adults, and minors can't contract. So when you have an insurance contract, it spells out the terms of your contract there on the paper. One of the things that you realize, I'm sure, is that the insurance business is highly regulated. It's regulated by our state government. Almost every state that I'm aware of, the ones that I practice law in, have an insurance commission that deals with the requirements for, particularly in this particular case, automobile insurance. Now, how do you know what kind of limits you got? Well, of course, it's in the contract if it's your insurance. Now, if you're making a claim against someone else's insurance, our law, the state of Tennessee's law, doesn't allow for the disclosure of insurance limits. But that doesn't have anything to do with the damages that you claim. So your attorney should deal with the amount of damages you claim first and foremost. Really, that's the only tool that you have. You make the claim, the allegation for damages based upon what the law allows for the particular state. All of the states around us basically have the same thing. You're entitled to compensatory damages. Those damages can also reflect medical special damages. That is the amount of your medical expenses, pain and suffering, mental anguish. There can be other expenses and costs associated with that litigation. And basically, once you add all those things up, you come up with a number that you believe compensates for that particular damage. As you might be well aware, you can't identify, there's no formula. Lawyers have to have the expertise and the training to be able to give an idea about what bodily injury might be worth. That includes pain and suffering, mental anguish, the changes medically that have occurred as a result of injury, which could be a result of automobile or some other form of injury. So your question sort of presupposes that the lawyer's done his job. That's the way to determine the damages, is to sort of add up all of those things and have a formula or some sort of estimation based upon other court awards for other cases that are similarly situated. But there is no formula. So does it make a difference where the same insurance company is involved? No, because the contract of insurance only covers that amount of money that the contract calls for. Whatever your particular insurance policy and declaration page says is the value of that insurance coverage, that's what it is. If there is a judgment or an amount of damages that is claimed that is in excess of that insurance declaration page, then you have to rely upon the individual wealth of the person that has caused the injury, or the entity, if it's a corporation that's caused the entity. So there's really no issue. If both parties have the same insurance company, the insurance has to pay. If they don't pay, that's another lawsuit called a bad faith insurance claim. So those claims can be put into effect. A bad faith insurance claim is also a cause of action that an attorney can pursue if they believe that there's a reason that the insurance company has acted in bad faith and has not paid a claim or paid in accordance with the contract of insurance. Does that answer your question?
Well, how do you know you have the right? I know this is a tough question to answer. How do you know you have the right attorney? Because all these attorneys claim to be the best, or just,
okay, well, I'll do the same thing.
But how do you know that your guys are what? Should there be a time? Excuse me. Would any red flags go up to say that this guy's really not doing what he should be doing? He's not taking time with your case. It's not big enough for him or her. He doesn't care about it. Are there any red flag signs to drop that attorney and go to another one?
Well, I think there are some things you should consider. First, if there is a specialization so if there is an agency or an organization that specializes, so specialization simply indicates that the attorney who claims specialization, and certainly you've got to check on this and make sure it's true. But if that attorney specializes, it just simply means that attorney has performed in the field that the expertise is claimed in to a degree that's been examined by the certifying agency and that has been scrutinized. At least they usually do an investigative process, and they've said that that person has met those qualifications set up by the organization, and they usually have to pass a test of some sort. The overall qualifications usually are the result of a number of years of experience in a particular field or a particular type of case. So, for instance, my criminal trial specialist specialization required a certification by the agency that I had had a number of cases that were tried to jury trial, that had a number of types of examination of certain specific kinds of witnesses, and that the verdicts had been reached, along with other cases, depositions, and other things that were required in the specialization, along with passing a test. So that test was graded by the organization. It's ultimately resulted in my certification. That's the sort of same thing that happens with other people. So that's number one. The other thing is you need to look at the bar association that they're involved with, or the certifying agency for the state. So in Tennessee, it's the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility. You can check with them and see if there's been any complaints. You should do that in advance of hiring someone, but certainly if you've got some idea that there's something going on, you can always check with them and see if there's been a problem. And then finally, it's the ordinary things that you would expect in any relationship that involves service. So we're talking about service. You know what happens when you go to a restaurant and you get bad service. Certainly the law and restaurants are not exactly equivalent, but if you get a sense that you're not being treated properly, the person's not communicating to you, you're not getting the sort of things that you would expect in terms of relationship back and forth, the person's telling you, the attorney's telling you what's going on in your case, you're doing things in a reasonable period of time, the explanations that may occur as a result of or things that you might not understand or being explained to you. That's the sort of thing that you need to check in and find out if that person is actually doing their job. And if they're not, you can move on. That's one of the things about our country. Lawyers are not required to represent you, and you're not required to have the same attorney. If you don't like what's going on, you're entitled to. You want to move on, explain your problem to them, and then move on. Now, if you are having a problem with an attorney, there are, at least in our bar association here in Chattanooga, avenues for you to be able to complain about that attorney and to find out ways that you might be able to sort of mediate either fee agreements or other issues that have come about. So those are sort of things you might want to consider.
Great answer. All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Absolutely, caller. Number to call in, by the way, is 423-800-8949 if you want to call in to talk to Clay Whitaker, who is a lawyer. And Clay, if I'm in a bad situation, I'm in a bit of a spot, how can I get in contact with you?
Our office is McCune, Williams, and Ashley. It's a full-service law firm. We have a national and a little international connection. Our number is 756-6400. We're in the Republic Parking Building downtown on Chestnut Street, 633 Chestnut. Currently, we're on the 14th floor. Anticipating we're going to be moving to the 15th floor. We're sort of in between a new office. So if you need to contact us, you can always call us at that number. Also, I've got we can give out email address if you'd like to email any questions. Be pleased to answer. That's C Whittaker, WHITTAKER at MWALawfirm.com.
Wow, that was fast. You've done this before, I can tell.
That's my radio voice.
Very good, very good. You should consider a career. But no, talking about getting back to sort of what we were talking about before, the one thing that always gets me going, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, but the thing that I always realize is a bad idea is when some bad thing happens and then somebody says there ought to be a law. And chances are there already is one, but the other chance is they're wanting legislation based on emotion and politics, which you're talking about is not necessarily the best thing to have happen.
Yeah, Russell, you're exactly right. And that's the problem I find in a lot of legislation, that events, one of the things that attorneys say, and I think this is a good approach to take, is that bad facts make bad law. And that's true even in terms of the development of legislation when you're trying to criminalize a particular event. I've always had a problem with some of the laws that have been developed recently in the last number of years that are negligence oriented. So there are a number of cases, for instance, reckless endangerment, negligent criminal homicide. That is a slippery slope that you enter into when you start trying to punish conduct that isn't intentional. And the whole thing about these negligent laws that we have, legislatures, our legislature and all the states around us have the same sort of thing. They've criminalized conduct that is less than intentional but greater than ordinary negligence. So it's willful. It requires some sort of blindness to the facts that have occurred, so that either you're acting in a way that's wanton or willful or grossly negligent. There's some danger there. So just like you said, one of the things I've tried to discuss with folks in our profession is that social sciences should be relied upon more often than they are. Social sciences are not the answer to everything, but it is one of the components I think that is too often ignored. One of the things that you can look at here locally is sort of we were mentioning during the break is the Violence Reduction Initiative. General Pinkston's a great district attorney here in this area. One of the things that he's had to deal with is the sort of attempt to put a lid or a cap on violence in the area. But without the application of social sciences, you're not going to get to the root of it. So the benefit of social science is to be able to evaluate a set of circumstances and to develop policy, legislation, punishment that's more community oriented. One of the things that we need to continually focus on is that crime is a community issue. The punishment of it needs to be a community issue. And you need to never forget that when you punish a criminal, the effects not only affect the criminal himself, but it affects his family and his ability to provide for that family, the resulting parenting and other issues that result from the incarceration affect that family and the future generations.
And we're talking about the VRI. Just recently we had the creation of, I think they call them gang-free zones, areas where if you were seen with gang colors or associating with gang members, you would be arrested on the spot. Is that something that you think is going to actually solve any problems or just make the situation go underground?
Well, I think it's a way for law enforcement locally to have closer contact with the people in a particular area. And so if you sort of look at, I'm no expert in law enforcement. I'm an expert in trying to prevent people from getting convicted. So I want to stay in my lane and not get too far out of bounds.
Sure.
But my concern primarily is with the effect on the Constitution, and our problem has to do with okay, you put a special zone in effect, you've restricted the activities of people, the ability to travel. So travel is an important thing. It's not something that you should ignore. Everybody has the right to travel in and out of a particular area and the right to associate. Those are natural laws that are guaranteed by our Constitution. That should continue. I do have a disagreement with the concept that our local law enforcement has to try to adopt these ideas and be able to interdict potential crime. It's not too far from the sort of thing you might expect if you remember the movie Minority Report.
Oh, sure.
Where we ended up going from one step to the other and then eventually identifying what they called pre-crime. So pre-crime was a classification of people and that prevented them from doing certain things because they were going to be criminals. Ultimately, those people were incarcerated or punished as a result of what they might do, not what they did do. And that's a problem I see with this sort of idea that you're talking about, limiting people's association and because of what they have done in the past and what they might do in the future.
And I've noticed that as a trend with law, and especially with law enforcement, is that they are trying to be law prevention instead of, or law, crime prevention instead of actual law enforcement. They're not there to stop crimes from happening. They're there to enforce the law and arrest you after a crime has allegedly been committed.
Well, that's Russell. That's always been the way law enforcement has to operate. Essentially, I mean, if they're fortunate enough to get information that allows to prevent a crime in the future, that they had information that that the crime was going to unfold and they could stop it before it happened, that's great. That doesn't happen very often. It's usually sort of reaction, a response that's necessary. And of course, we talked about what happens after that. It's the development of a case that should result in a charge through either, in our case, General Sessions Court, or an indictment, either indictment here locally in the state courts or in federal court. And in those sets of circumstances, law enforcement isn't necessarily stopping or preventing crime. They're talking about arresting the person and removing that person from society as part of their scheme of punishment, which the legislature has authorized.
And if you arrest someone, they immediately go into, unless they're bailed out, they go into some institution of some kind. And if you're arresting a bunch of people en masse, you're going to end up with overcrowding, which has been a complaint here in Hamilton County.
It is, and that's a problem. It has been a problem almost 20 years or more now. One of the things I would indicate to those listeners now is that we were talking a little bit before about the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1986. Well, the unintended consequences of that crime bill was overcrowding. Okay, what happened after that? You had overcrowding because you had people that were put in jail for very long sentences. You had to expend money that could have been used for other things to incarcerate people for long periods of time for crimes that they may or may not have necessarily deserved punishment. Like I said, the problem here was we've described a crime and a group of people that should be punished, but the group that was aimed at was large-scale drug dealers. However, the people that got punished was everyone that was involved in the drug business. For instance, there's an example now I've got for you. Big Pharma has put huge amounts of money and marketing into the development of pain medication. So pain medication is a problem that we have in our area. Pain medication, first of all, has been approved by the FDA. The truth or the veracity of the marketing that's been provided to the FDA and to doctors has certainly been questioned. One of the problems has been OxyContin. OxyContin was allowed to be put out by the government. It's resulted in an epidemic. And that's something we should talk about some more.
At perhaps a later date.
That'd be great.
Tell me one more time, how can we get in contact with you?
McCoon, Williams, and Ashley, 633 Chestnut Street. Phone number 756-6400. My name's Clay Whitaker, certified trial specialist by the National Board of Trial Advocacy. Thanks, Russell, for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you, listener.